The sun beat down mercilessly on Marlene Sawyer's back as she stood outside the Aspen trading post, her grandmother's jewelry wrapped carefully in a faded handkerchief. Knowing that selling these precious heirlooms was her only chance to save the ranch her father had built with his own 2 hands before consumption claimed him 6 months ago. The year was 1883, and Aspen, Colorado had transformed from a rough mining camp into a bustling silver town, filled with prospectors, merchants, and opportunists of every stripe. Marlene had watched the transformation with mixed feelings. The growth meant more opportunities, but it also meant higher taxes, more regulations, and creditors who were less willing to extend credit to a 22-year-old woman trying to run a cattle ranch alone. She pushed open the heavy wooden door of Murphy's trading post, the bell above jangling to announce her arrival. The interior was dimly lit compared to the bright August afternoon outside, and Marlene blinked as her eyes adjusted. Shelves lined the walls, packed with everything from canned goods to mining equipment, leather boots to bolts of fabric. The smell of tobacco, leather, and dust filled her nostrils. Behind the counter stood Gerald Murphy himself, a portly man with thinning gray hair and spectacles perched on his bulbous nose. He looked up from his ledger as she approached, his eyes narrowing slightly when he recognized her. "Miss Sawyer," he said, his tone neither warm nor cold. "What brings you to town today?" Marlene clutched the handkerchief tighter, steeling herself. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times during the 2-hour ride from the ranch, but now that she was here, the words stuck in her throat. Finally, she unwrapped the bundle and laid it on the counter. The jewelry glinted in the lamplight. There was a cameo brooch that had belonged to her great-grandmother, brought over from England in 1845. A pair of gold earrings her grandmother had worn on her wedding day. A silver locket containing tiny portraits of Marlene's grandparents as a young couple. A string of pearls her grandfather had given his wife on their 10th anniversary. And finally, a ring with a small but genuine diamond, the most valuable piece in the collection. Murphy picked up his jeweler's loupe and examined each piece with methodical precision. Marlene watched his face, trying to gauge his thoughts, but the man was as readable as stone. "I can give you $40 for the lot," he said finally, setting down the loupe. $40. Marlene's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Mr. Murphy, these are quality pieces. The ring alone is worth more than that." "Perhaps in a fancy shop in Denver," Murphy said, shrugging. "But this is Aspen, and I have to think about how long it will take me to sell these items. $40 is a fair offer." It was not fair, and they both knew it. Marlene needed at least $80 to pay the most pressing debts and keep the bank from foreclosing on the ranch. She opened her mouth to negotiate when the door behind her opened, letting in a shaft of bright sunlight and a tall figure. "Afternoon, Murphy," a deep voice said. Marlene turned and found herself looking up at a man who embodied everything she imagined when she thought of the word cowboy. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his worn but clean shirt. His face was tanned and weathered, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His hair was dark, almost black, and curled slightly at the collar. He wore dusty chaps over his trousers and spurs that jingled softly as he walked. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. They were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they were currently fixed on the jewelry spread across Murphy's counter. "Xavier," Murphy acknowledged with a nod. "What can I do for you?" So, this was Xavier Rutledge. Marlene had heard the name around town. He ran one of the most successful cattle operations in the valley, had a reputation for fair dealing, and kept mostly to himself. Some said he had come from Texas, others claimed Kansas. No one seemed to know for sure, and he did not talk about his past. Xavier's gaze shifted from the jewelry to Marlene, and she felt something shift in her chest, an awareness that had nothing to do with the desperate circumstances that had brought her here. "Did not mean to interrupt," he said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that confirmed the Texas rumors. "I can wait." "No, we are finished here," Murphy said, starting to gather up the jewelry. "Wait," Marlene said quickly. She could not accept $40, but she could not leave empty-handed either. $50, Mr. Murphy, that is my final offer." Murphy shook his head. "40 is all I am willing to pay." Marlene felt her cheeks burn with frustration and embarrassment. She was acutely aware of Xavier Rutledge standing a few feet away, witnessing her humiliation. Pride warred with desperation. Pride lost. "Fine," she said quietly, hating how defeated she sounded. $40. "Actually," Xavier's voice cut through the moment, "I am interested in purchasing those pieces myself." Both Marlene and Murphy turned to stare at him. "You, Rutledge?" Murphy sounded skeptical. "What would you want with women's jewelry?" "That is my business," Xavier said mildly, but there was steel beneath the polite words. He stepped up to the counter, standing close enough to Marlene that she could smell leather and sage and something clean like soap. "What are you asking for them, Miss?" "Sawyer," she supplied. "Marlene Sawyer. Miss Sawyer." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect. "What price were you hoping to get?" She hesitated, unwilling to name a figure that might seem greedy, but also unwilling to undersell her grandmother's treasures again. "The pieces are worth at least $80, but I would accept $75. Murphy snorted. "Young lady, I just told you they are not worth near that much." "To you, perhaps," Xavier said, picking up the cameo brooch with surprisingly gentle fingers for such a large man. "But beauty has different value to different people." He examined each piece as Murphy had done, but with more care, more reverence. "These belong to your grandmother. Yes, she passed 2 years ago. I am sorry for your loss." The sympathy in his voice sounded genuine. "These are fine pieces. Well crafted, well loved, I would wager." Marlene felt her throat tighten. "Yes." Xavier set down the last piece, the diamond ring, and looked at her directly. "I will give you $100 for them." The world seemed to tilt. "I beg your pardon, $100, cash money." He was already reaching into his vest pocket, pulling out a leather wallet. "Now wait just a minute," Murphy sputtered. "You cannot just come in here and interfere with my business transaction." "You said the deal was done," Xavier pointed out, counting out bills with practiced ease. $40 was your offer. The lady has chosen to accept mine instead." He laid the money on the counter, a stack of bills that represented more than just salvation for the ranch. It represented kindness from a stranger, and that somehow made it both wonderful and terrible. Marlene stared at the money, then at Xavier Rutledge, trying to understand. "Why would you do this?" Something flickered in those storm cloud eyes. "Let us just say I know what it is like to have to sell something precious to survive. I am in a position to help, so I am helping." He pushed the money toward her. "Take it, Miss Sawyer." Pride reared up again, fierce and strong. "I cannot accept charity." "It is not charity, it is a fair trade. I am getting valuable jewelry, you are getting fair compensation." He began gathering the pieces, wrapping them carefully in the handkerchief. "Unless you have changed your mind about selling." She had not changed her mind. She could not afford to. But taking $100 when she had been willing to accept 40 felt wrong somehow, like she was taking advantage of his generosity. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier said quietly, "These pieces are worth every penny of what I am paying, Miss Sawyer. Probably more. You are not cheating me." Still, she hesitated. "Please," he added, and that single word spoken with such simple sincerity broke through her resistance. Marlene picked up the money with trembling fingers. "Thank you, Mr. Rutledge. You cannot know what this means. I have some idea." He tucked the handkerchief bundle into his saddlebag, which he had apparently dropped by the door when he came in. "Are you in town alone?" The question was not improper, just practical, but it still made her aware of how isolated she had been these past months. "Yes. I have supplies to purchase, and then I am heading back to my ranch. The Sawyer place out past Maroon Creek." She was surprised he knew it. "Yes. That is a long ride. You should not be on the road after dark. There have been reports of drifters causing trouble." Murphy grunted his agreement. "He is right about that, Miss Sawyer. Just last week, a couple of unsavory characters tried to rob the stage." Marlene straightened her shoulders. "I have made the ride many times, Mr. Rutledge. I will be fine." "I am sure you will," he agreed easily, "but I am heading that direction myself. We might as well ride together. Safety in numbers and all that." It was on the tip of her tongue to refuse, but practicality won out over pride for the second time that day. The truth was, she would feel safer with company, and Xavier Rutledge did not strike her as the sort of man who would take advantage of a woman. "I would appreciate that," she said. "I just need to make my purchases and I will be ready to go. Take your time. I have business of my own to conduct." He nodded to Murphy, who was still looking disgruntled about losing out on the jewelry sale, and headed toward the back of the store where the ranching supplies were kept. Marlene made her purchases quickly, buying the essentials she needed: flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt, a few yards of fabric to mend her worn dresses, and ammunition for her rifle. With Xavier's money, she could afford to stock up properly for the first time in months. She even bought a small tin of peaches, a luxury she had not allowed herself in a long time. As Murphy tallied her purchases, clearly in better spirits now that she was spending money in his store, Marlene found her gaze drifting to where Xavier was examining a new saddle. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, running his hand over the leather with the same careful attention he had given her grandmother's jewelry. "That Rutledge is a strange one," Murphy said, following her gaze. "Showed up in Aspen about 3 years ago with a herd of prime cattle and enough money to buy the old Harrison ranch outright. Keeps to himself mostly, but folks say he is fair to his hired hands, pays them well, treats them decent." "Is he married?" The question was out before Marlene could stop it, and she felt heat rush to her cheeks. Murphy's eyes gleamed with speculation. "No, miss. No wife, no family that anyone knows of. There have been plenty of women who have set their caps for him, you can be sure of that. He is rich, handsome, and single, but he has not shown interest in any of them." The storekeeper leaned forward conspiratorially. "Some say his heart was broken back in Texas, and that is why he came west." Marlene told herself she was not interested in gossip, but she filed the information away nonetheless. "How much do I owe you, Mr. Murphy?" The total came to $18, which left her with enough to pay her debts and have a small cushion for the first time in months. As Murphy loaded her supplies into a crate, relief washed over her so powerfully that she had to grip the counter to steady herself. She was going to keep the ranch. Her father's legacy was safe, at least for now. Xavier appeared at her elbow, his own purchases complete. Ready to head out. "Yes, thank you." He hoisted her heavy crate as if it weighed nothing and carried it outside to where her wagon waited. It was not much of a wagon, really, just a small buckboard with a mule named Jasper hitched to it. Xavier loaded the crate with practiced efficiency while Marlene climbed onto the seat. His own horse was a magnificent bay gelding, tall and well-muscled. Xavier swung into the saddle with fluid grace, settling the reins in one hand. "We will take it slow," he said. No need to rush and tire out your mule." They set off down the main street of Aspen, past the saloons and boarding houses, the assay office and the bank. The mountains loomed all around them, their peaks still capped with snow even in August. Marlene had grown up in these mountains, and their beauty never failed to move her. For the first mile, they rode in companionable silence. Marlene was acutely aware of Xavier riding beside her wagon, matching his pace to Jasper's plodding walk. She had 100 questions she wanted to ask, but could not figure out how to voice any of them without seeming nosy or forward. It was Xavier who finally broke the silence. "How long have you been running the ranch alone?" "6 months. My father died in February." The words still hurt to say. "I am sorry. That must be difficult." "It is." There seemed no point in pretending otherwise. "He taught me everything he knew about ranching, but there is a difference between helping and being solely responsible. Creditors who would have given my father time to pay are less patient with me. Neighboring ranchers who respected him think I should sell out and move to town, find a husband to take care of me." Bitterness crept into her voice despite her best efforts to keep it out. "But you do not want to sell. The ranch is all I have left of my family. My mother died when I was 12, and I have no siblings. If I sell, I am just another unmarried woman dependent on the charity of distant relatives, or the slim prospect of finding respectable work in a town full of men who think women are only good for cooking, cleaning, or worse." She was surprised by her own candor. There was something about Xavier Rutledge that invited confidence, a quiet steadiness that made her feel safe speaking truths she usually kept locked away. "How many head of cattle do you have?" he asked. "About 50, down from 100 when my father was alive. I had to sell half the herd to pay for his medical care and the funeral." She paused. "I am down to one ranch hand, and he is 70 years old and half blind. He stayed on more out of loyalty to my father's memory than because I can afford to pay him properly." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and Marlene worried she had said too much, revealed too much of her desperate situation. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than pitying. 50 head is enough to build on if you can get them through the winter. Do you have enough hay put up?" "Not yet. That is part of what I am worried about. The south meadow needs to be cut, but I cannot do it alone, and old Chester's back cannot take that kind of labor anymore. I could send some of my men over to help with the haying." Pride flared again. "I cannot pay them." "I was not asking for payment. Neighbors help neighbors. That is how things work out here, or how they should work anyway." Marlene wanted to accept. She desperately needed the help. But the thought of being indebted to this man, who had already done so much for her today, was almost unbearable. As if sensing her internal struggle, Xavier said, "You can pay me back when you are on your feet again. Or you can send your man Chester over to help with my fall roundup. Fair trade either way." That made it easier to accept. The roundup help would be fair once I can spare him, and I would be grateful for assistance with the haying. Consider it done. I will send 3 men over tomorrow if the weather holds." They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable now. The road wound through stands of aspen trees, their white bark glowing in the late afternoon sun. A creek babbled somewhere nearby, and birds called from the branches above. "Can I ask you a question?" Marlene ventured after a while. "You can ask. I may or may not answer." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Why did you really buy my grandmother's jewelry? You could have just offered me a loan or work or any number of things. Why pay so much for pieces you have no use for?" Xavier was quiet for so long that Marlene thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, "My mother had a brooch similar to that cameo. Her mother had given it to her, and it was the only nice thing she owned. When my father's ranch failed, when we lost everything, She tried to sell it to buy food for me and my sisters. The shopkeeper offered her $2 for a piece worth 20. She took it because she had no choice. I was 12 years old, and I swore that day that if I ever had the means, I would make sure no one else had to accept robbery disguised as charity. The raw honesty in his words struck Marlene like a physical blow. What happened to your family? My father drank himself to death within a year. My mother worked herself into an early grave trying to keep us fed. My sisters married young to escape poverty. One is in Kansas, the other in California. I have not seen either of them in 10 years. He looked straight ahead as he spoke, his profile carved against the mountains. I came west to start over, to build something that could not be taken away, and I succeeded. Now I have more money than I need, and it seems only right to use some of it to help others when I can. That is very kind. It is not kindness exactly, more like settling old scores with the universe. He turned to look at her then, and she was caught by the intensity in his eyes. You remind me of my mother, Miss Sawyer. You have that same fierce determination, that same refusal to give up even when everything is stacked against you. When I saw you in that store trying to negotiate with Murphy, I saw her, and this time I had the power to make things right. Marlene felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. Your mother would be proud of the man you have become. I hope so. His voice was rough with emotion. I hope so. They rode on, and Marlene found herself studying Xavier Rutledge with new eyes. He was not just a successful rancher or a handsome man. He was someone who had known suffering and chose to respond with generosity. Someone who understood what it meant to fight for survival and to carry the weight of family legacy. Someone, she realized with a start, she could very easily fall in love with. The thought should have frightened her. She had no time for romance, no room in her life for complications. The ranch demanded every ounce of her energy and attention. And yet, as the miles passed and they talked about cattle breeds and water rights, about the best way to treat screwworm and the challenges of finding good ranch hands, she felt something unfurling in her chest, something warm and hopeful that had been dormant for a very long time. By the time they reached the turnoff to her ranch, the sun was sinking toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Xavier insisted on riding with her all the way to her house, a small cabin her father had built with his own hands 20 years ago. Chester came out to meet them, his weathered face breaking into a smile when he saw Marlene was safe. He was a wiry man, bent with age, with a shock of white hair and shrewd blue eyes. Was starting to worry, Miss Marlene, he said, then noticed Xavier and straightened a bit. Mr. Rutledge. This is a surprise. Chester. Xavier dismounted and helped Marlene down from the wagon, his hands warm and strong on her waist. I will send some men over tomorrow to help with the haying if that is all right with you. Chester's eyes widened. More than all right. That is downright generous of you, just being neighborly. Xavier turned to Marlene. I should be getting back to my own place before dark. Will you be all right here? We will be fine, she assured him. And thank you again, Mr. Rutledge, for everything. Xavier, he said. Please call me Xavier. Then you must call me Marlene. He smiled, a slow, warm smile that transformed his face and made her heart skip. Marlene, it suits you. He mounted his horse and touched his hat brim in farewell. I will see you soon. She watched him ride away, his tall form silhouetted against the fading light, and felt a pang of something she could not quite name. Chester cleared his throat, and she turned to find him watching her with knowing eyes. Seems like a good man, Chester observed. Yes, Marlene agreed. Yes, he does. They unloaded the wagon in companionable silence, and Marlene carried her supplies into the cabin. It was not much, just 3 rooms. A main living area with a fireplace and kitchen space, a small bedroom that had been her father's, and an even smaller room that was hers. But it was home, and thanks to Xavier Rutledge, it would remain home. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Marlene unwrapped the money Xavier had given her and counted it again, still hardly able to believe her good fortune. $100. It was more than generosity. It was a lifeline. But it was the memory of his eyes, storm cloud gray and full of understanding, that stayed with her as she drifted off to sleep. True to his word, Xavier sent 3 men over the next morning. They were polite, efficient, and clearly well-trained. With their help, Chester was able to cut and bale the South Meadow in 2 days, work that would have taken Marlene and Chester weeks to accomplish on their own. Xavier himself did not come, and Marlene told herself she was not disappointed. He was a busy man with his own ranch to run. There was no reason for him to make the trip out to her place. On the 3rd day, she rode into town to pay her debts. The satisfaction of handing money to her creditors, of seeing the overdue stamps marked as paid, was immense. The bank manager, a sour-faced man named Thornton, seemed almost disappointed that he could not foreclose on her property. "You have bought yourself some time, Miss Sawyer," he said, counting the money she gave him with meticulous precision. "But I would advise you to seriously consider selling. Ranching is no business for a woman alone." "I will keep that in mind," Marlene said sweetly, taking her receipt and leaving before he could lecture her further. She was just stepping out of the bank when she nearly collided with someone. Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up to find Xavier smiling down at her. "We have to stop meeting like this," he said, his eyes warm with humor. "People will talk. People already talk," Marlene pointed out. "Small towns thrive on gossip." "True enough." He released her arms, though he seemed reluctant to do so. "How did the haying go?" "Wonderfully. Your men were a tremendous help. Please tell me what I owe you for their labor." "You owe me nothing. They were already on my payroll." "Xavier." "Marlene." He said her name with a softness that made her stomach flutter. "Let me do this, please." She was learning that his quiet pleas was impossible to resist. "Then at least let me make you dinner. Tonight, if you are free. It is the least I can do to show my appreciation." Something flared in his eyes, something that looked like pleasure and something deeper. "I would like that very much. 6 o'clock. I will be there." He touched his hat and continued on toward the general store, leaving Marlene standing on the boardwalk with her heart racing. It was just dinner, she told herself. A simple thank you for his help. It did not mean anything. But as she climbed back into her wagon and headed home, she could not stop smiling. She spent the afternoon in a flurry of activity. She cleaned the cabin until it shone, scrubbing floors and windows, dusting surfaces that had been neglected in recent months. She dug out her mother's good tablecloth, yellowed with age but still beautiful, and set the table with the mismatched china that was all she had left of her grandmother's wedding set. Then she turned her attention to the meal. Her supplies were still limited, but she could make a decent pot roast with potatoes and carrots. She had canned green beans from last summer's garden, and she used some of her precious flour to make biscuits. For dessert, she opened the tin of peaches and made a simple cobbler. Chester, bless him, made himself scarce without being asked, muttering something about checking on the cattle in the far pasture. Xavier arrived exactly at 6 o'clock, riding up to the cabin as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. He had cleaned up, she noticed, wearing a fresh shirt and trousers, his hair still damp as if he had recently bathed. He carried a bottle of wine, an unexpected luxury. "I was not sure what you were cooking," he said, handing her the bottle, "but wine goes with just about everything." "It is perfect, thank you." She stepped aside to let him in, suddenly nervous about having him in her home. It seemed too intimate, too domestic, even though Chester was technically there as well, somewhere on the property. Xavier looked around the cabin with interest, taking in the simple furnishings, the books stacked on a shelf near the fireplace, the faded photographs on the mantel. "This is nice, cozy." "That is a polite way of saying small." I meant what I said. It feels like a home, not just a house. He walked over to the photographs. "Is this your father?" "Yes. That was taken about 5 years ago." She came to stand beside him, looking at the image of her father in his Sunday best, his face stern but his eyes kind. He was a good man, stubborn as a mule but good. "You must get your stubbornness from him," she laughed. "Probably. My mother always said we were too much alike, which is why we butted heads so often. And this must be your mother." He indicated another photograph, a formal portrait of a young woman with dark hair and serious eyes. "Yes. She died of influenza when I was 12. I still miss her." "I am sure you do." His voice was gentle. "Loss leaves a hole that never quite fills, does it?" "No, but we learn to live around it." They stood there for a moment, shoulders nearly touching, united in their understanding of grief. Then Marlene shook herself. "I should check on dinner. Please make yourself comfortable." Xavier sat in one of the wooden chairs near the table, watching as she moved around the small kitchen area. She was very aware of his gaze, of the way his presence seemed to fill the room. "How is the ranch doing?" he asked. "Now that you have been able to pay off some debts." "Better. I feel like I can breathe again." She checked the pot roast, pleased to see it was tender and ready. "I cannot thank you enough for what you did, buying the jewelry for such a generous price. You saved the ranch, you know. If I had only gotten the $40 Murphy offered, it would not have been enough." "Murphy is a thief in a shopkeeper's clothing," Xavier said flatly. "He has been cheating people in this town for years, but he is careful to stay just this side of legal. I have been looking for an excuse to put him in his place." Marlene began dishing up the food. "Is that what I was, an excuse?" "No." The word was quiet but firm. "You were someone who deserved better than what she was getting. That is all." She brought the plates to the table, along with a basket of biscuits and the bowl of green beans. Xavier opened the wine with a corkscrew he pulled from his pocket, pouring them each a glass. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "To new beginnings," she echoed, touching her glass to his. The wine was good, much better than anything she had tasted in a long time, and the meal, if she did say so herself, turned out well. Xavier ate with obvious enjoyment, complimenting her cooking in a way that seemed sincere rather than merely polite. They talked as they ate, conversation flowing easily. Xavier told her about his ranch, about the challenges of finding water in dry years, and the satisfaction of seeing a new calf born healthy and strong. Marlene talked about her father's dreams for the ranch, about the improvements he had planned to make before illness stole his strength. "Did he know," Xavier asked quietly, "how sick he was?" "Yes. The doctor told him he had maybe 6 months. He was determined to use that time to teach me everything I needed to know." Her voice wavered. "Some days I think he succeeded. Other days I feel completely lost." "I suspect your father would say that is normal. Nobody knows everything, Marlene. We all figure it out as we go." "Is that what you did?" "More or less." He took a sip of wine. "When I first came to Colorado, I knew cattle but not much about mountain ranching. I made mistakes. Some of them costly. But I learned and I kept going. That is all any of us can do." After dinner, Marlene served the peach cobbler and Xavier declared it the best thing he had eaten in years. They moved to the chairs by the fireplace, even though the evening was warm and no fire burned. It just seemed like the natural place to sit and talk. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marlene said, emboldened by the wine and the easy intimacy of the evening. "You can ask. I may or may not answer." "Why did you never marry? Murphy said half the women in town have set their caps for you." Xavier laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "Murphy exaggerates. But to answer your question, I suppose I never found the right person. I have been focused on building the ranch, on proving I could make something of myself. Romance seemed like a distraction I could not afford. And now—" He looked at her, his gaze steady and intent. "Now I am beginning to think I might have been wrong about that." Marlene's breath caught. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibilities. She should say something, break the tension, but she could not seem to form words. Xavier leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "Marlene, I want to be honest with you. I did not buy your grandmother's jewelry just because I felt sorry for you or because you reminded me of my mother. I bought it because I wanted a reason to see you again. Because from the moment I saw you in that store, standing up to Murphy with your chin raised and your eyes blazing, I could not stop thinking about you." Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Xavier, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know the timing is not ideal. You are dealing with the ranch, and I am not trying to add complications to your life. But I wanted you to know how I feel. And I wanted you to know that I am here if you need anything. As a neighbor, as a friend, or as something more if you are ever inclined in that direction." Marlene stood, her legs shaky, and walked to the window. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky, stars beginning to appear. She could see Xavier's reflection in the glass, could see him watching her with that patient, steady gaze. "I have been telling myself I do not have time for this," she said softly. "That I need to focus on the ranch, on survival. That letting myself feel anything for you would be foolish and impractical. And yet," she turned to face him, "and yet I cannot seem to stop thinking about you either. When you rode away the other night, I felt this ache, this loneliness I had not felt before. Or maybe I had felt it, but had gotten so used to it that I did not notice until you made it go away for a little while." Xavier stood, crossing the room to stand before her. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "What do you want, Marlene?" It was a simple question, but it felt enormous. What did she want? She wanted to save the ranch. She wanted to honor her father's memory. She wanted to prove to everyone in Aspen that a woman could run a successful cattle operation. But she also wanted this. Wanted him. Wanted the way he looked at her like she was capable and strong and beautiful. Wanted the safety she felt in his presence, the sense that she was not alone in her struggles. "I want to take a chance," she whispered. "I want to see where this goes, even though it terrifies me." "It terrifies me too," he admitted. "I have been alone for a long time, Marlene. I have told myself I was content with that, but content is not the same as happy. And being with you, talking with you, makes me happier than I have been in years." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. When she did not, he cupped her face in his hands, his palms rough and warm against her skin. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Yes," she breathed. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and searching. Marlene had been kissed before, awkward fumbling attempts by boys in her youth, but nothing had prepared her for this. Xavier kissed her like she was precious, like she was something to be savored. His hands were careful on her face, his mouth warm and firm against hers. She reached up, gripping his shoulders for balance, and kissed him back with all the longing and hope and fear tangled up inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I met you," he murmured. "I am glad you did." They stood there, holding each other as darkness fell completely outside. Finally, reluctantly, Xavier stepped back. "I should go. It is getting late and I do not want to compromise your reputation." Reputations seem like such small concerns right now, Marlene said, but she knew he was right. She was already fighting an uphill battle in a man's world. She could not afford to give the gossips any ammunition. At the door, Xavier turned back. "May I call on you again? Properly, I mean, courting." The old-fashioned word made her smile. "I would like that very much." "Good." He brushed a quick kiss across her forehead. "Sleep well, Marlene. You too, Xavier." She watched from the doorway as he mounted his horse and rode away, his form gradually swallowed by darkness. When she could no longer see him, she went back inside, touching her fingers to her lips and smiling. Chester came in a little while later, studiously not mentioning that he had probably been hiding in the barn to give them privacy. "That Rutledge fellow seems decent," he offered. "He is," Marlene agreed. "Very decent. Your father would have liked him, I think, coming from Chester, who had been her father's best friend. That was high praise indeed." "I think so too." The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and increasing happiness. Xavier came to call twice a week, always bringing something. Fresh vegetables from his garden, a book he thought she might enjoy, once a ridiculous hat from the general store that made them both laugh until they cried. They took long rides through the mountains, Xavier showing her places on his property he thought were beautiful, Marlene sharing her favorite spots on her own ranch. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, hopes, and dreams. Xavier was unlike anyone Marlene had ever known. He was strong but gentle, confident but not arrogant. He treated her like an equal, asking her opinions on ranching matters and listening carefully to her answers. When she talked about her plans for the ranch, he offered suggestions but never directives, supporting her vision rather than trying to impose his own. He made her laugh with dry observations about the characters in town. He made her think with his insights about life and loss. And he made her feel beautiful, desired, cherished in ways she had never experienced. Their relationship did not go unnoticed in Aspen. Marlene could feel the speculative looks when she went to town, could hear the whispers that cut off when she approached. Some of it was benign curiosity. Some of it had sharper edges. One afternoon in early September, she was in Murphy's store buying coffee when she overheard two women talking in the next aisle. "It is shameful, really," one of them said in a carrying whisper. "Throwing herself at Xavier Rutledge like that. Everyone knows she is only after his money." "Well, what did you expect?" the other replied. "She is desperate to save that ranch. Marrying rich is easier than actually working." Marlene felt her face burn. She wanted to march around the corner and confront them, but before she could, she heard a third voice, sharp and authoritative. "Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Foster, I suggest you keep your malicious gossip to yourselves unless you want the whole town to know about your own indiscretions." There was a shocked silence, and then the sound of skirts rustling as the two women hurried away. Marlene peeked around the corner to see who had defended her, and was surprised to find a woman she had never met before, tall and elegant with auburn hair and striking green eyes. The woman turned and spotted Marlene. "Ah, you heard all that, did you? I am sorry. Some people have nothing better to do than tear others down." "Thank you for defending me," Marlene said, stepping into view, "though you did not have to." "I despise hypocrites," the woman said briskly. "And those two are among the worst offenders in Aspen. I am Caroline Winters, by the way. I run the boarding house on 3rd Street, Marlene Sawyer. I know who you are. The whole town is buzzing about you and Xavier Rutledge." Caroline's eyes sparkled with amusement. "For what it is worth, I think you make a lovely couple. Xavier has been alone too long and you seem like a woman with enough spirit to match him." Despite herself, Marlene smiled. That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness, just observation. I am a good judge of character, Miss Sawyer. It comes from running a boarding house and dealing with all sorts of people. And I can tell you that the women gossiping about you are just jealous. You have managed to catch the eye of the most eligible bachelor in town, and they cannot stand it. They talked for a few more minutes, and Marlene found herself liking Caroline Winters. The woman was frank and funny, with a sharp intelligence and a kind heart. By the time they parted ways, Marlene felt she had made a friend, something she desperately needed in a town where she often felt isolated. That evening, when Xavier came to call, she told him about the encounter. His jaw tightened when she repeated the gossip, but Caroline's defense made him smile. "Caroline is good people," he said. "She does not suffer fools gladly. I am glad she spoke up for you." "It bothered me more than I thought it would," Marlene admitted. "The accusation that I am only interested in you for your money. Anyone who knows you would know that is absurd. You are one of the proudest, most independent people I have ever met. You would rather starve than marry for money. You know that, I know that, but the rest of the town—" "The rest of the town can think what they like," Xavier said firmly. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Marlene, we know the truth of what we have. That is all that matters." But Marlene could not shake the feeling that the gossip was a warning of challenges to come. She and Xavier were from different worlds in many ways. He was established, wealthy, respected. She was struggling, barely holding on to her ranch, viewed with suspicion because of her gender and her youth. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier said, "Talk to me. What are you worried about?" She sighed. "I suppose I am worried that the gossips are right in a way. Not about my motivations, but about the practicality of this relationship. You are successful, Xavier. You have built a life for yourself. I am barely surviving. What if I lose the ranch despite everything? What if I fail? Would you still want me then?" Xavier stood and pulled her up with him, holding both her hands in his. "Marlene, listen to me. I do not care about the ranch. I care because you care, because it matters to you. But if you lost it tomorrow, if you had to start over with nothing, it would not change how I feel about you. I fell for you, not for your property or your prospects. I fell for your courage and your stubbornness and the way you faced down impossible odds without flinching. Xavier." Her voice cracked. "I love you," he said simply. "I have probably loved you since that first day in Murphy's store. And I will love you whether you are running a successful ranch or working as a cook in a boarding house or doing anything else. You are what matters to me, not the rest of it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to stay focused and practical, but I cannot help it. I love you so much it scares me." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Then we will be scared together, and we will figure out the rest as we go." They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun set outside and the room grew dim. When Xavier finally kissed her, it was with a fierce tenderness that made her heart ache. "Marry me," he whispered against her lips. "I know it is soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am certain, I have never been more certain of anything. Marry me, Marlene." She should say it was too soon. She should be practical and cautious. But she had been practical her whole life, and where had it gotten her? Sometimes, she realized, you had to take a leap of faith. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The joy on Xavier's face was worth every risk, every uncertainty. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Marlene felt herself melting into him, into this moment, into the promise of a future she had not dared to hope for. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and breathless, Xavier said, "I should warn you, once people find out we are engaged, the gossip is going to get worse before it gets better." "Let them talk," Marlene said recklessly. We know the truth, and that is all that matters." "You said so yourself." "I did I not?" he grinned. "You are going to hold me to my own words. Every single one of them." They set the wedding for mid-October, giving themselves a month to make arrangements. It would be a small ceremony, just a few friends and Xavier's ranch hands, held at Marlene's ranch because it felt right to have it there, in the place her father had built. But first, there was the matter of the jewelry. One evening, about a week after their engagement, Xavier arrived at Marlene's cabin carrying the familiar handkerchief bundle. "What is this?" Marlene asked, though her heart had already guessed. Xavier unwrapped the bundle, revealing her grandmother's jewelry laid out on the table. "These belong to you. They are your family's legacy, and you should not have had to give them up." Marlene stared at the pieces, emotions warring inside her. "But you paid for them." "I did, and now I am giving them back to you." He picked up the cameo brooch, the one that had started everything. "Your grandmother's jewelry should not be sold to save a ranch. It should be worn by her granddaughter on her wedding day." "Xavier, I cannot." "Yes, you can." His voice was gentle but firm. "Marlene, these pieces are part of your history, part of who you are. When I bought them, it was never with the intention of keeping them. I wanted to make sure they did not end up in Murphy's hands, sold off to strangers who would not know or care about their significance. But they were always meant to come back to you." "You are giving me back my pride," she whispered, understanding finally why he had titled his gesture this way in her own mind. She had sold these pieces out of desperation, out of necessity, sacrificing a part of her family's heritage to survive. By returning them, Xavier was not just giving her jewelry. He was giving her back something she had lost, some essential piece of herself. "You never lost your pride," Xavier said, setting the brooch down and taking her hands. "You did what you had to do to save your father's legacy. There is no shame in that. But now you do not have to choose between your family's past and its future. You can have both." Marlene picked up the locket, opening it to see the tiny portraits of her grandparents. They looked so young, so full of hope. She hoped they would have approved of Xavier, of the choice she was making. "Will you wear some of these at our wedding?" Xavier asked. "I want to see you in them the way your grandmother must have worn them." "Yes," she agreed. "I will wear them all." The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy and strange and wonderful. Xavier insisted on helping with the ranch work, riding over most days to assist Chester with repairs and preparations for winter. He was teaching Marlene about breeding lines and market prices, sharing his knowledge freely. To Marlene's surprise, other ranchers in the area began to treat her differently too. Xavier's obvious respect for her opinion seemed to lend her credibility in their eyes. Men who had dismissed her as a foolish girl playing at ranching now sought her input on water rights and grazing permits. It should have bothered her that she needed Xavier's endorsement to be taken seriously, and part of it did. But the practical part of her was just grateful for the change. She was learning that fighting every battle on principle alone was exhausting. Sometimes, you had to accept help from unexpected places and be grateful for it. Caroline Winters became a good friend during those weeks, helping Marlene sew a new dress for the wedding. It was not fancy, just a simple day dress in a soft blue fabric that brought out the color of her eyes, but it was new and pretty and made Marlene feel special. "You are going to be a beautiful bride," Caroline said, pinning the hem one afternoon in Marlene's cabin. "Xavier is a lucky man." "I think I am the lucky one," Marlene said honestly. "He has given me so much, not just financially, but in every way that matters." "Love should be like that," Caroline said, her voice holding a note of wistfulness that made Marlene look at her curiously. "Have you ever been in love, Caroline?" "Once." The older woman's hand stilled on the fabric. "A long time ago. He died in the war, After that, I decided it was safer to build a life on my own terms rather than risk that kind of loss again. I am sorry. Do not be. I have made a good life for myself. And watching you and Xavier gives me hope that maybe love can work out after all, at least for some people. She smiled and resumed her work. Now stand still and let me finish this hem, or you will be getting married in your work clothes. The night before the wedding, Marlene stood in her cabin alone, looking at the dress hanging on the door, at her grandmother's jewelry laid out on the dresser. Tomorrow, she would become Marlene Rutledge. Tomorrow, her life would change in ways she could hardly imagine. She was nervous, she realized, not about marrying Xavier. She had no doubts about that, but about everything that would come after. They had talked about combining their ranches, about the logistics of merging 2 properties and 2 lives. It made sense practically, but it also meant leaving this cabin, this place where she had grown up, where her parents had loved and lived and died. There was a soft knock on the door, and Chester poked his head in. Saw your lamp still burning. Could not sleep. Too much to think about. Chester came in, settling into one of the chairs by the cold fireplace. Your father would be proud of you, you know. You saved the ranch just like you set out to do, and you found yourself a good man in the bargain. I miss him, Marlene said softly. I wish he could be here tomorrow. I reckon he will be, in his own way. Chester was quiet for a moment, then said, Your father told me once, right before he died, that his biggest regret was leaving you alone. He was worried you would shut yourself off, would become so focused on keeping the ranch that you would forget to live. I think it would ease his mind to know you found someone to share your life with. I hope so. I know so. Chester stood, patting her shoulder awkwardly. Get some sleep, Miss Marlene. Tomorrow is going to be a good day. After he left, Marlene did sleep, and she dreamed of her father smiling, of her mother laughing, of a future bright with possibilities. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the aspens turning gold on the mountainsides, the sky an impossible blue. Marlene dressed carefully, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened her grandmother's cameo at her throat, slipped the pearl earrings into her ears, clasped the locket around her neck. The ring she would save for Xavier to place on her finger during the ceremony. Caroline arrived early to help with her hair, pinning it up in a style that was both elegant and simple. When Marlene finally looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked radiant, she realized. Happy. The ceremony was held outside, in the meadow behind the cabin where wildflowers still bloomed despite the cooling temperatures. A circuit preacher from Aspen officiated, his Bible worn and his voice strong. Xavier's ranch hands lined up on one side, scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best. Caroline and a few other women from town stood on the other side, and Xavier stood at the front, tall and handsome in a new black suit, his eyes fixed on Marlene as she walked toward him on Chester's arm. You look beautiful, he murmured as she reached his side. So do you, she whispered back, making him smile. The ceremony was simple and traditional. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady despite the emotion running high. When the preacher asked if Xavier had a ring, he produced not just the diamond ring from Marlene's grandmother's collection, but also a simple gold band. Your grandmother's ring for your right hand, he said softly, sliding it onto her finger. And this ring for your left as a symbol of our marriage. The gold band fit perfectly, and Marlene felt tears prick her eyes as she looked down at her hands. Past and future joined together. I now pronounce you man and wife, the preacher intoned. You may kiss your bride. Xavier did, thoroughly and tenderly, while their small gathering cheered and whistled. When they finally broke apart, both laughing, Marlene felt a happiness so complete it was almost painful. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. The ranch hands had set up tables in the meadow, and Caroline had helped organize a feast from contributions by various townspeople. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, pies and cakes, and even some champagne that Xavier had ordered specially from Denver. They danced in the meadow as the sun set, Xavier holding Marlene close as someone played a fiddle. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and thought that she had never been happier in her entire life. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, his breath warm against her hair. "That I am grateful. For you, for this day, for second chances." "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Mrs. Rutledge. I love you too." As darkness fell and stars began to appear, the guests began to drift away. Chester had tactfully arranged to spend the night at Xavier's ranch, giving the newlyweds privacy. Caroline hugged Marlene tightly before she left. "Be happy," she whispered. "You deserve it. Thank you for everything." Finally, Marlene and Xavier were alone. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, and Xavier swept her up in his arms at the threshold, carrying her inside with ease. "Starting as we mean to go on," he said with a grin. "And how is that, together?" He set her down gently, and they stood in the dim lamplight, suddenly shy despite everything they had shared over the past weeks. Xavier reached up and carefully removed her grandmother's jewelry, setting each piece reverently on the dresser. "I want to be careful with these," he said. "They are precious." "So are you," Marlene replied, reaching up to unbutton his shirt. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a slow exploration of love and trust. Xavier was patient and gentle, mindful of Marlene's inexperience, and by the time the moon rose high in the sky, she felt transformed. She was no longer Marlene Sawyer, alone and struggling. She was Marlene Rutledge, loved and cherished, with a partner to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days that followed, they began the work of merging their lives. Xavier's ranch was larger and better equipped, so it made sense to make it their primary residence. But Marlene could not bear to simply abandon her father's cabin, so they decided to keep it as well, using it during the busy seasons when they needed to be closer to the southern pastures. Xavier insisted that Marlene keep her own bank account, her own money from the sale of her cattle. "We are partners," he said firmly. "What is mine is yours, but what is yours remains yours. I want you to always have independence, always have choices." It was a modern attitude for the times, and Marlene loved him all the more for it. They worked side by side through the fall roundup, Marlene proving herself as capable as any of Xavier's ranch hands. She had a natural talent with cattle, a patience and intuition that served her well. The men, initially skeptical of having a woman as the boss's wife and working partner, quickly came to respect her. Winter came early that year, snow falling in mid-November and blanketing the valley in white. Marlene and Xavier spent long evenings by the fire in his ranch house, which was larger and more comfortable than her cabin. They read aloud to each other, played cards, made plans for the spring. "I want to expand the herd," Marlene said one evening, studying a ledger. "With our combined resources, we could afford to buy another 100 head of breeding stock." Xavier looked over her calculations, nodding. "That is ambitious, but doable. We would need to hire another hand or two. I was thinking we could bring Chester to live here. He could help manage the day-to-day operations, and he would not have to live alone in that little cabin of his anymore." "That is a fine idea. He has been good to you, Marlene. It is only right to take care of him now." They brought Chester to live in a small cottage on the ranch property in December, and the old cowboy settled in with contentment clear on his weathered face. He proved invaluable in managing the men and the livestock, and Marlene was grateful to have him close. Christmas that year was special. Marlene and Xavier decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and holly, and on Christmas morning, Xavier presented her with a beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a photograph album, the kind with thick pages and ornate covers. "I thought you could start filling this with our family's story," he said. "Photos of the ranch, of us, and someday of our children." Marlene hugged him tightly. "It is perfect, thank you." She had a gift for him, too, a new saddle she had ordered from a craftsman in Denver, tooled with his initials. Xavier ran his hands over the leather with obvious appreciation. "This must have cost a fortune." "I used my own money," she said, "from the cattle sales. I wanted to give you something special." "You already gave me the most special gift I could ask for," he said, pulling her into his lap. "Yourself." They spent a quiet Christmas with Chester and a few of the ranch hands who had no families to go home to, sharing a feast and stories by the fire. Marlene felt a contentment she had never known, a sense of belonging that went beyond blood ties. As winter deepened into January and February, Marlene realized her monthly courses had not come. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes, but when a second month passed, she knew she had to tell Xavier. She chose a quiet evening, just the two of them by the fire. "Xavier, I have news." He looked up from the book he was reading, his expression concerned at the seriousness of her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong, at least I do not think so." She took a breath. "I think I am with child." Xavier went very still. Then a smile spread across his face, slow and joyful and bright. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there." He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her up and spinning her around. "We are going to have a baby." Marlene laughed, holding onto his shoulders. "Yes, we are. Are you happy?" "Happy, Marlene, I am beyond happy. This is everything I never dared to hope for." They held each other, rocking slightly, both overcome with emotion. Finally, Xavier pulled back, his hands on her shoulders. "We need to get you to a doctor in Denver, make sure everything is all right." "Xavier, women have babies all the time without doctors. Not my wife, not my baby." His tone was firm. "We are going to Denver and that is final." Marlene could have argued, but the truth was, she was nervous about the pregnancy. Her own mother had died relatively young, though not in childbirth. Still, having a doctor's reassurance would ease both their minds. They made the trip to Denver in early March, a long, cold journey that took 3 days each way. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes, examined Marlene thoroughly and pronounced her healthy, the baby due in late August or early September. "Everything looks good," he assured them. "Just make sure she gets plenty of rest, eats well, and does not overexert herself." Xavier took the advice seriously, perhaps too seriously. He wanted Marlene to stop working entirely, to spend her days resting in bed. She had to put her foot down. "I am pregnant, not dying," she said firmly. "I will be careful, but I am not going to become an invalid for the next 6 months." They compromised. Marlene continued to help with the ranch work but avoided the most strenuous tasks. She spent more time on bookkeeping and planning, less time on riding and roping. Xavier hovered like a nervous mother hen, which she found both annoying and endearing. As spring arrived and the snow melted, revealing green grass beneath, Marlene felt the baby move for the first time. It was like a flutter, a whisper of movement that made her gasp and press her hand to her belly. "What is it?" Xavier asked, alarmed. "The baby. I felt the baby move." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, though the movements were too faint for him to feel yet. His eyes filled with wonder. Our baby, she agreed. The pregnancy progressed well through the spring and into the summer. Marlene's belly grew round, and she felt the baby move more frequently, strong kicks that sometimes made her wince. Xavier talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn child about the ranch, about the mountains, about all the things they would do together. "You are going to be such a good father," Marlene said one evening, watching him with her heart full. "I hope so. I want to give our children everything I did not have. Stability, love, a home they can count on. They will have all that, I promise." In late August, as the aspens began to show hints of gold, Marlene went into labor. It was a long, difficult process, and there were moments when she was sure she could not go on. But Xavier was with her the whole time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to leave even when Caroline gently suggested he might be more comfortable waiting outside. "I am not leaving my wife," he said firmly. Finally, after nearly 20 hours, their son was born. He came into the world squalling, his little face red and furious. The doctor, who had agreed to stay at the ranch for the last 2 weeks of Marlene's pregnancy, cleaned him up and placed him in her arms. "You have a healthy boy," he announced. Marlene looked down at her son, at his tiny perfect fingers and his shock of dark hair, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Xavier leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "You are both beautiful." "What should we name him?" Marlene asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything. Now, looking at his little face, Xavier said, "What about James, after your father?" Marlene felt her heart squeeze. "Yes, James Rutledge." Little James proved to be a healthy, hungry baby with a strong set of lungs. Those first few weeks were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and steep learning curves. But they were also filled with wonder and joy. Xavier was a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor with a crying baby, changing diapers without complaint, gazing at his son with endless fascination. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he said one night, holding James against his chest as the baby slept. "I thought I understood love when I married you, Marlene, but this is different. This is our family, our future." "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." As James grew from a newborn into an infant with a personality, Marlene found herself settling into a rhythm. She had hired a young woman from town, Sarah, to help with the house and the baby, which freed Marlene to return to some of her ranch duties. It was a balance, motherhood and ranching, but she was determined to maintain both. The ranch continued to prosper. The additional cattle they had purchased proved to be a good investment, and beef prices were strong that year. By the time James celebrated his first birthday, Xavier and Marlene had paid off the last of the debts and were looking at expanding further. "We could buy the Henderson property," Xavier suggested one evening, studying a map of the valley. "Old man Henderson wants to retire and move to Denver to be near his daughter. He is willing to sell at a fair price." Marlene looked at the map, seeing how the Henderson land adjoined theirs on the western border. "That would give us control of the water rights to Willow Creek." "Exactly. We would be the largest ranch in the valley." It was a big decision, one they discussed at length. In the end, they decided to make the purchase, pooling their resources and taking out a modest loan from the bank. Thornton, the bank manager, was far more willing to lend to Xavier Rutledge than he had been to Marlene Sawyer, a fact that still rankled but that she chose not to dwell on. By the time James was 2, they had successfully integrated the Henderson property and hired several more hands. The ranch was thriving, and so was their family. Marlene discovered she was pregnant again, and in the spring of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Xavier's mother. Elizabeth was a quieter baby than James had been, content to observe the world with wide, serious eyes. She had Xavier's coloring but Marlene's delicate features. James, now old enough to toddle around, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. "Gentle," Marlene would remind him as he patted Elizabeth's soft head with his chubby hands. "She is very small." "Small," James agreed solemnly. Watching Xavier with their 2 children, Marlene sometimes thought back to that day in Murphy's trading post, when she had been desperate enough to sell her grandmother's jewelry. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to a different person. She still had the jewelry, carefully stored in a velvet-lined box. Someday, she would give the cameo and the pearls to Elizabeth, the locket to James. They would understand, she hoped, the significance of these pieces, the way they represented not just family history but also redemption and second chances. One evening, when Elizabeth was about 6 months old and James was playing with his wooden animals on the floor, Xavier found Marlene standing by the window, looking out at the mountains. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "About how lucky we are. How different things could have been." "You make your own luck," Xavier said. "You fought for this ranch, for this life. You did not give up when things were hard. Neither did you. You came west and built something from nothing." "We built something together," he corrected. "That is what makes it special." Marlene leaned back against him, feeling the strength of his body, the warmth of his love. "Do you ever regret it, marrying me so quickly, taking on all my problems? Not for a single second." He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Marlene, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and these children, this life we have built. I wake up grateful every single day." "So do I," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Marlene felt the same flutter in her stomach that she had felt that first time in her cabin so many years ago. Some things, she thought, never changed. The love between them was as strong as ever, maybe stronger for all they had weathered together. The years passed in a blur of activity. James grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Elizabeth was quieter but equally intelligent, with a talent for numbers that had Marlene predicting she would take over the ranch's bookkeeping someday. In 1889, Marlene gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas. He was a sunny, cheerful baby who rarely cried and seemed to find everything delightful. Their family felt complete, their home filled with love and laughter. Chester lived to see all 3 grandchildren, as he called them, though he was not related by blood. He passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1890, at the age of 78. They buried him on the ranch, near a grove of aspens he had always loved, and Marlene wept for the loss of the man who had been like family to her. "He was happy here," Xavier said, holding her as she cried. "He got to see the ranch thrive, got to see our children grow. That is a good legacy." "I know. I am just going to miss him." "Me too." As the 1890s began, Aspen continued to grow and change. The silver boom that had brought prosperity was starting to show signs of weakening, but the town had diversified enough that it remained vibrant. Marlene and Xavier were respected members of the community now, their ranch one of the most successful in the region. Caroline Winters became like an aunt to their children, spoiling them with treats and gifts whenever they came to town. She never married, but she seemed content with her life, her boarding house always full, her friendships deep and meaningful. Murphy's trading post changed hands in 1892 when Murphy himself died unexpectedly. The new owner was fairer in his dealings, and Marlene felt a sense of poetic justice in that. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier surprised Marlene with a trip back to the cabin where they had been married. It had been maintained over the years, used periodically by ranch hands, but for this occasion, Xavier had it cleaned and stocked with supplies. They spent a week there, just the two of them, having left the children in Caroline's capable care. It was a second honeymoon of sorts, a chance to reconnect without the demands of parenthood and ranching. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Xavier pulled out a small box. Inside was a new piece of jewelry, a necklace with a pendant shaped like an aspen leaf, crafted in gold. "I wanted to give you something that represents our life here," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "The aspens, the mountains, everything we have built together." Marlene touched the pendant, feeling the smooth gold warm beneath her fingers. "It is beautiful, thank you." "Thank you," Xavier said, "for taking a chance on a cowboy who bought your grandmother's jewelry on a whim." It was not a whim. It was kindness. It was seeing someone who needed help and choosing to help them. Maybe. But it was also seeing a beautiful, fierce woman and falling head over heels in love with her. Marlene laughed. "You did not know me well enough to love me that first day." "Did I not?" Xavier took her hand, raising it to his lips. "I saw enough to know you were special." The rest was just confirmation. They made love that night in the cabin, in the same bed where they had spent their wedding night. It was different now, deeper and richer for all they had shared, but it was also familiar and comforting. Afterward, lying in Xavier's arms, Marlene thought about the journey that had brought them here, the desperation that had driven her to sell her grandmother's jewelry, the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the love that had grown between them, strong and true. "I would do it all again," she said softly. "Every hardship, every challenge, it was all worth it to end up here with you." "Me too," Xavier murmured, pulling her closer. "Me too." They returned to the ranch rejuvenated, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead, and there were challenges. A drought in 1893 tested their water management skills. A harsh winter in 1894 claimed some of their cattle, but they weathered each storm together, their partnership stronger for each trial. The children grew. James, at 12, was already talking about taking over the ranch someday. Elizabeth, at 10, was proving to have a head for business that impressed even Xavier. Thomas, at 7, was the artist of the family, always drawing the mountains and the horses and his siblings. In 1896, Marlene surprised herself by getting pregnant again at the age of 35. She had thought her childbearing years were over, but life had other plans. Their fourth child, a daughter they named Sarah after the young woman who had helped them with the first children, was born in the spring of 1897. "Our surprise blessing," Xavier called her. And indeed, little Sarah was a joy from the moment she arrived. As the new century approached, Marlene sometimes reflected on how much had changed in her life. She had gone from a desperate young woman on the brink of losing everything to a prosperous rancher, a wife, a mother of 4. She had not just survived, she had thrived. The jewelry that had started it all was now stored carefully for her daughters. Elizabeth and Sarah would inherit these pieces, would wear them and pass them on to their own daughters someday. The legacy would continue, but now it was intertwined with new memories, new love, new stories. On a warm summer evening in 1899, the whole family gathered on the porch of the ranch house. James was 15 now, tall and strong, already working alongside Xavier as a full partner. Elizabeth was 13, keeping the ranch books with meticulous precision. Thomas, at 11, had already sold several of his drawings to people in town. And Sarah, at 2, was toddling around, getting into everything and charming everyone she met. Xavier sat with Marlene on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, watching their children play in the yard. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. "Can you believe it has been 16 years since we met?" Xavier asked. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever." Forever in a good way, I hope. In the best way. She leaned her head on his shoulder. We have built a good life, Xavier. A really good life. We have. And it all started because you were brave enough to walk into that trading post and fight for what mattered to you. And because you were kind enough to help a stranger in need. We helped each other, Xavier said. That is what love is, I think. Helping each other, building something together, being stronger together than we ever could be apart. Marlene thought about that, about the truth of it. She had been strong alone, had survived and fought and persevered. But with Xavier, she was not just surviving. She was living fully and joyfully. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, always have, always will. They sat there as darkness fell, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter and the chirping of crickets, the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of aspen leaves in the breeze. The ranch that had once been Marlene's desperate burden was now a thriving legacy. The jewelry that had represented her last hope was now a family treasure. And the cowboy who had redeemed every piece, along with her pride, was now her partner in every sense of the word. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Marlene felt a peace settle over her, deep and abiding. This was what happiness looked like. This was what it meant to be truly home. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. James married a local girl in 1904 and brought her to live on the ranch, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Elizabeth shocked everyone by going to college in Denver, studying business, and then returning to help expand the ranch into new ventures. Thomas became a renowned artist, his paintings of Colorado mountain life sought after by collectors across the country. But he never strayed far from the ranch, building a studio on the property where he worked and raised his own family. Sarah, the baby, grew into a spirited young woman who loved horses more than anything. She became one of the best horse trainers in the state, a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as California. Through it all, Marlene and Xavier remained the heart of the family. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their faces weathering like the mountains they loved. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more essential on their 40th anniversary. Surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, Xavier stood to make a toast. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his 70 years. I walked into a trading post and saw a beautiful woman trying to sell her grandmother's jewelry to save her ranch. I did not know then that I was looking at my future, at the person who would make my life complete. But I am grateful every day that I had the wisdom to see something special in her and the courage to act on it. He turned to Marlene, raising his glass. To my wife, my partner, my best friend. You redeemed my life, Marlene, just as much as I redeemed those pieces of jewelry. You showed me what love could be, what family could mean. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to hope for. Here is to 40 more years. I will drink to that, Marlene said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, though we might not make it to 80 years of marriage. Then we will make the most of however many years we have left, Xavier replied. They did exactly that. Xavier lived to be 78, passing away peacefully in 1907 with Marlene holding his hand. She grieved deeply, the loss of her life partner leaving a void that could never be filled. But she did not break. She had their children, their grandchildren, the ranch they had built together. She lived another 10 years, watching the ranch continue to thrive under James's management, seeing her grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. She passed on the stories of how the ranch was saved, how a cowboy bought her grandmother's jewelry and gave it back, how love could bloom even in desperate circumstances. When Marlene died in 1917 at the age of 56, peacefully in her sleep, she was buried next to Xavier on a hill overlooking the ranch. Her grandmother's jewelry was divided among her daughters and granddaughters, each piece carrying with it the story of redemption and love. The ranch continued for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they combined courage, determination, and love. And though the world changed dramatically over the years, the story of Marlene and Xavier remained, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that kindness can change everything, and that true love is worth fighting for. The cameo brooch, the pearls, the locket, and the ring passed through the generations, each piece treasured not just for its monetary value but for what it represented. A moment of desperation transformed into a lifetime of joy, pride redeemed, and love that lasted beyond even death itself. And in that small trading post in Aspen, Colorado, where it all began, people still told the story of the woman who bartered her grandmother's jewelry and the cowboy who redeemed every piece, along with her pride, and in doing so, found a love that would echo through the ages.